It was a horrible, rotten, no good day. One of those, God, where are you? What in the world are you doing? Young nobles and women had been captured, chained together, and they were now being marched 900 miles away. The beautiful young women to be placed in the conquering king's harem. The young men, young nobles to be castrated and then trained in astrology and the occult and the religion of the conquering king for 3 years, and then forced to serve him the rest of their life. Like I said, it was a horrible, rotten, God, where are you? What's up with this? Well, nearly 70 years later, one of those young nobles, still alive, decided to write his story. And he wrote it in a book. The principles of how he not only thrived, but was able to, not only survive, but thrive in that environment were so powerful, God said, print it and save it. It became one of the 77 books in God's library that we call the Bible. And the man's name was Daniel. Perhaps you've heard of him. Now, his book is one of the most misunderstood books in the entire Bible because people think of it through all kinds of different lenses modern day that were not at all a part of how they treated it when he first wrote this. In modern day terms, it's often thought of as the ideal Sunday school curriculum. If you've had the privilege of growing up in a Christian home, you've probably heard the story of Daniel and the lion's den and his 3 friends who refused to bow down to an idol being thrown into a fiery furnace. You've probably heard that so many times. I know by 5th grade, I could teach the class. We often think of it as an adventure story. Some people are big in prophecy, think of it as a prophetic book, because towards the end, he's got some prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. And a lot of people think the main message of the book of Daniel is if you will be courageous and obey God, he will deliver you from whatever it is you face, from the fiery furnace, the hungry lions. But if that's the purpose of why God said print it and save it for the book of Daniel, he's got some explaining to do. Because when you look back throughout history, how many people have been thrown to hungry lions only to find they've just gone on a high-carb diet? Hasn't happened. How many people have been thrown into fiery furnaces for their faith and come out alive? The 3 in the book of Daniel. No, the book of Daniel was actually written and saved for adults as a primer to show us what it takes in the most godless of environments, most spiritually hostile of environments, to not just survive, but to thrive and make a difference for God. Now, the reason it's Babylon, before we dig into this passage, you need to know a little more about Babylon. Babylon is the epitome of evil. It's the personification of all evil in the Bible and to this day in the heavenlies. When the angels gather together and they talk about something being wicked, they don't say it's Nazi Germany-like, it's ISIS-like, you know what they say? That's Babylonian. Now, how do I know that? I have not been to heaven and come back. But I've read the book of Revelation where it tells us what the angels say when they are informed that now is the time for the Lord to return. And guess what they say? Fallen is Babylon. Even though it hasn't existed for thousands of years. You see, God had said after he had used them to bring judgment on the disobedience of the Israelites, he said, when I'm through with you, your city, your place is going to be absolutely destroyed and never built again. And that's exactly what has happened. It to this day does not exist as the original Babylon. It's gone. And yet all this time down history, and whenever it is the Lord returns, it's a personification of evil. So I want to ask you to do a couple things today as we dig into this passage. Number 1, I'm going to give you a homework assignment, and that is to read through the book of Daniel, looking at the 4 key things we're going to point out from chapter 1, and see through the rest of his book in what we call the Old Testament, you see these things over and over and over again. And the other thing is I want all of us to think of wherever it is, it's hard to live for our faith. Or there's a hostile reaction to our faith, or it's disrespected. Because Babylon comes in all kinds of different places for Jesus followers. Sometimes we find ourselves in an entire nation that wants nothing to do with the gospel and with Jesus or his followers. Sometimes we find ourselves in a company or a state or a city, or sometimes it's your extended family. It might just be the little department you work in or the neighborhood you live in. But we all, to some degree, have our Babylons. And as we're in the middle of it, we go, what in the world do I do? And then what we need to do is go to the book of Daniel and figure out, what did he do? And we can see every one of these four things in the first chapter of his story. And then I'm going to assign you, if you will, let me do so, to have you read through it over and over again a couple times, and to see how important it is, and at times how contrary it is to the natural response that we have as Jesus followers to the Babylons we face in our own life. So you ready? Here we go. If you got a Bible with you, find Daniel chapter 1. God put a table of contents in the front to make it easy to see. Use your digital device, and we'll have it up on the screen. So we got it every which way. So it starts out with this first principle, which is confidence. Confidence. Daniel had an unusual confidence. And it wasn't like the wishful thinking. Today we say, I hope. In the Bible, when the word hope is done, it's not, I hope the weather's good, I hope my team wins. It's, I'm absolutely certain my team will win, and I'm basing everything on it. Jesus is called our blessed hope. What's that mean? Well, I hope he's real. No, it means everything is based on that. And Daniel had that kind of confidence, unshakable confidence. And we find it in these first couple of verses. Daniel 1, verses 1 and 2. During the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and he besieged it. And here's the key that unlocks the entire book of Daniel. Circle, highlight, underline it. The Lord gave him victory. Now, my church talks to me when I speak, so you got to help me out now. Who gave the victory? The Lord. Mark that. Stamp it. It is so incredibly important. If we don't understand this, nothing in Daniel's thought patterns and his behavior and the rest of the book makes any sense. And it's why we sometimes turn it into nothing more than an adventure story. As he's writing his autobiography, looking back, he says, you need to understand, when I was about 16 years old and all of this happened to me, I didn't like it, I didn't understand it, I didn't know what God was up to. I wanted him to do something different, but I knew this. It's the Lord who's in control, and it's the Lord who's delivering. And it goes on and reads this. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred things from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylon and placed them in the treasure house of his God. What did he do? He says, well, the Lord let him win the victory, and then the Lord let him go and raid the temple of God, take things devoted to God, take them 900 miles back, put them in the temple of a demon god named Baal to mock the God Most High, the God of Israel, and to show Baal's superiority. And Daniel says, I don't get it. But it was the Lord who permitted it. It was the Lord who delivered him. Here's what Daniel knew and was a key to his confidence. Even in Babylon, God is in control of who's in control. Even in the darkest place of human history, God is in control of who is in control. And once he got that, he was able to do the three things that we're going to see in a few minutes to add to his confidence that we'd never do otherwise. If any of you are sports fans, and in particular, think of football, a quarterback comes up and he's given a play from the coach to run, and then he looks at the defense, he realizes that play won't work. So he does something called audibilizing. He calls a different play, and he's a hero if he calls a good play that is very successful. And I think sometimes as Christians, what we do is we walk up, we look at it and we go, that play won't work. So we audibilize and do our own thing. But here's the deal. We haven't got a human coach over there. We've got God as our coach. And when he calls a play, you and I need to run it no matter what the defense is set up. And even if it doesn't work, he's got a plan because God's in control of who's in control. Always has been and always will be. which means panic and despair are never appropriate. It doesn't mean we love everything that happens. It doesn't mean there's not a time and place to be concerned or some level of worry. But the core is, if we have the confidence that Daniel had, like, who cares what the score is in the third quarter if you know how a game ends? You know, as a pastor, I'm often asked to preach through the book of Revelation. It's a constant question, decades of people. The problem is they don't really want me to teach the book of Revelation. They want me to tell them who the Antichrist is and when Jesus is coming back, right? And the problem is I don't know. I'm on the welcoming committee, not the programming committee. I got my balloons and, you know, I'm all ready to go when the party happens, but like I haven't been given the memo and the schedule. But I have read the book. And I don't know if you ever peek at the end of a book, but did you know we win? Are you aware of that? And if we win, like I said, who cares what the score is in the third quarter? But we often live our lives as if we don't know how it ends, don't we? One of my questions for each of us that claim to be Jesus followers, does your family, do your kids, do your coworkers, do your neighbors, would they say you live like you're gonna win? Or would they say when things go south and a Nebuchadnezzar rises up wherever it might be, that no, you're panicked as if somehow you didn't know the end? Now, I want to tell a story, but before I do that, I need to get grace from you. So, do you promise me grace? I'm skipping that story if that's... You promise me grace? Okay, because I'm going to need it. I grew up, it's my dad's fault, but I grew up a USC football fan. Sorry. God bless the other outliers. And long ago, far away in another galaxy, they were good. And at one point, they were on a winning streak. It looked like they were headed for their third straight national championship, third straight undefeated season. And on a Saturday afternoon, I'm watching a football game. I've got 2 Saturday night services I have to preach later than the ones on Sunday. But I'm watching this game, and it's a game against their #1 rival, which people who don't know USC think it would be UCLA. It's not. It's Notre Dame. 2 storied programs with lots of national championships and Heisman Trophy winners and all that. That's the game you want to win. So I'm watching it with a brand new big screen, alone. Well, SC's the superior team, but you know anything about sports. If you don't take advantage of the opportunities you have, even against a weaker opponent, if you keep squandering those, something bad's gonna happen, and that's exactly what USC did. I'm watching this game, and they squander opportunity after opportunity, and sure enough, with 2 minutes left in the game, Notre Dame marches down the field and takes the go-ahead touchdown. Now, I know that God's a Trojan, and it's gonna work out. So they're gonna run the kickoff back for a touchdown, doesn't happen. They start at the 20-yard line, they gain a couple of yards. The clock is now ticking down to seconds. And then on the next play, a Notre Dame lineman breaks through and throws the USC quarterback for a 13-yard loss. Man, the players are just celebrating like crazy. The fans are chest bumping and high-fiving. The announcers are talking about the end of the winning streak. The stupid leprechaun goes across the field. And I'm like ready to throw something at that TV. I know I'm a pastor, but I don't always act like one. Except for I realize it's new and expensive. And I'm also thinking like, my goodness, I'm supposed to preach in a few hours. I think God might strike me dead because of all the euphemisms I've been saying in the last few moments, right? Well, the next play, nothing happens. And with seconds left, the quarterback fades back, 4th and a zillion yards. And the pass just goes over the fingertips of a defender, nestles in a receiver's hands, runs down to the 1-yard line, and on the final play of the game, order is restored in the universe. Now, I have a tape of that game. I watch it a couple times a week. You know, I've watched it a few times. And it's really weird because when I get to the point where all is lost, that Notre Dame lineman breaks through, throws the quarterback for a 13-yard loss, all the Notre Dame fans are celebrating. You know what I do? I play it again in slow motion. And I just love the chest bump and the little, I think the leprechaun's kind of cute. And then I play it again. Why do I play that disastrous play over and over again? For one simple reason. Because what? I know how it ends. It's the same exact play, but knowing how it ends, my response is completely different. That's what God has called us to live like, in the confidence that God's in control of who's in control. Now, built on that, Daniel has some other things we're going to see, 3 others. I spend most of my time on this first one because it's the foundation of everything. Nothing else makes sense if we don't understand that. That's why those 2 verses are the key to understand the entire book of Daniel. But now let's take a quick look at the 3 other traits he had that you'll find over and over through the entire book of Daniel. So the second trait is wisdom. Daniel had incredible wisdom. And by that I mean he had the wisdom to pick his battles carefully. And I think sometimes that's what Jesus followers we struggle with. I know at North Coast Church that there's a passion for Jesus, there's a desire to be all we can be, but we often forget the confidence that we need to have, and then after that, we don't have the wisdom to pick our battles carefully. And when we don't have that wisdom, everything becomes a battle, and when everything is a battle, guess what? Everyone's an enemy. And as we read this, we get this little glimpse into what you'll see later on. But let's see how he learned to pick his battles wisely. Starting verse 3, chapter 1. Then the king ordered Asenaz, the chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families, who'd been brought to Babylon as captives. And I love the humble way he describes him and his friends. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men. Make sure they're well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace, if I say so myself. And then what's he to do? Train these young men, and we'll find out later, for 3 years in the language and literature of Babylon. That's code for astrology and occult. We also find the king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah, and the chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel, which means God is my judge, was called Belshazzar, which means the demon god Baal's prince. Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. Here's what I want you to notice. 3 years of studying astrology and occult, which were forbidden for Jews to practice, but not to know about. We're going to find out, he didn't sit in the back row and throw spitwads. He didn't sneer. He sat in the front row and took copious notes and is going to graduate number 1 in his class. Like, that's so different than many of us would have a natural response. This stuff is terrible, whatever. He sat there, and here's what happened. He knew it better than anybody else, graduating number 1 in his class, which set him up later on to have the credibility to stand before the king and say, this is all bunk. Let me tell you about the God Most High, which he did, but only because of that. His name changed. It's like I'm a Jesus follower, and my name's Christian, and you changed my name to Satan's prince. Daniel seems to go, I don't care what you call me, as long as it's not late to dinner, I'm good. And then he enters into the king's service. We're going to see this a little bit later, but he serves the king so well, he keeps getting promoted. In this day and age, I think politically or other things, man, if you serve in the, quote, wrong administration on either side of the aisle, how people look at it, it's like you're a traitor, right? But no, he served so well, he kept getting promoted to the highest levels that he was able to have influence. Because God had never said you can't serve a godless king. God had never said you have to have a God-honoring name. And God had never said don't do this, but he said it's okay if you know it. So here's the principle. There's a big difference between what we don't like and what God forbids. There's a huge difference between what I don't like and what God forbids. And I've noticed in the world that I have the opportunity to minister in, that a lot of times there are a lot of battles about something that doesn't have a Bible verse. Oh, I understand it's not a very good thing. I understand it's just honoring to God, but it doesn't have a Bible verse. And as I said, when everything is a battle, everyone ends up an enemy. And we lose our ability to have the influence that a Daniel did. Because Daniel not only survived and thrived, he actually leads 3 revivals and leads leaders to the God Most High during the 70 years. It's amazing. The least likely guy you'd ever think that would happen to. Now, you can't just have the wisdom to say, oh, I'm not going to fight about that if you roll over on everything. There's a flip side of that coin, and it's called courage. Daniel had confidence. Daniel had the wisdom to not make a battle out of what God hadn't said, draw a line. But wherever God drew a line, man, he had the courage. Let's read what he does. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and the wine given to them by the king. So there was a kosher diet. And what we need to understand, let me just pause for a second to set the stage. Daniel probably didn't know very much about the biblical laws. In the Old Testament, there's 613, 10 of which we call the 10 Commandments. My bet is he knew very, very few of them. Why? Gutenberg hadn't come along. He didn't have a Bible by his nightstand to read and study. He only knew what he was taught by the leaders and by the priest. We also know that when the children of Israel moved into their promised land, Moses had told them from God that if you follow me, I will bless you and other nations will flock to you. But if you don't follow me and you follow the gods of other nations and their ways, then I'm going to turn you over for a period of time for those other nations to rule over you. And that's exactly what's going on here. They were in such a spiritual dark realm that God has said, boom, the Babylonians get to take care of you for a while, then I'll deal with them. So even in the darkest times, a good Jew knew 3 things. Little boys are circumcised on the 8th day. That was a physical sign of being a Jew. They also know you're not supposed to bow down to idols, which is why his 3 friends in a later chapter refused to do so even on pain of death. And they know they're supposed to eat a kosher diet. That's why he draws the line there. But even in his courage to say, listen, I will not do it, and by the way, I'll accept whatever happens as a result, I want you to notice the way he shows his courage, and like I said, his willingness to accept the consequences. Because we live in a weird day. Whatever side of a political aisle or a religious question or whatever it is, there's a lot of people today who want to claim to be courageous, and all they've done is like the social posters, put it up. And we think courage is making a statement, and whenever there's a cost to it, like I said, all kinds of people, it's just part of our culture, we go, well, what do you mean I'm gonna be thrown in jail for doing this? Or or lose my job, or fill in the blank. And I'm here to remind us, it's not courage if there's no consequences. If I act like I'm courageous and expect no consequences, that's called bravado. But courage is what he and his 3 friends accepted being thrown in, having no idea they'd come out, and Daniel drawing the line. But let's see how he does it as well. He was determined not to defile himself, so it goes on, it says, he asked, circle, highlight, underline that phrase. It's so important. Didn't have a conniption fit, didn't demand, didn't go on hunger strike. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now, God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel, but he responded, you have no idea where you are, dude. This is Babylon, and that's Nebuchadnezzar. I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered you to eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I'm afraid the king is going to have me beheaded. So Daniel then rolled on the ground, wept. No. He spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And then once again, circle, highlight. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see, and we'll accept it. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of food and wine provided by others. And God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. Here's the principle. We got to have the wisdom to pick our battles, right? But we also, when God's law is clear, we must do what he says no matter what the consequences. It's a balance of 2 sides. If I turn everything in a battle, everyone's an enemy, I make no impact. But if I decide to lay over on everything, I have no impact. And if I'm gonna have courage, I need to do it within the framework that he did, which is like, okay, we'll accept whatever. His 3 friends, before they're thrown in the fiery furnace, I love what their response is. It's like, no, we're not gonna bow down. And you need to understand, our God is able to deliver us. Pretty brave, right? I love the next phrase. And even if he does not, we're not gonna bow down. It's the courage to take the stand where God has drawn the line and accept without whimpering whatever those consequences are. A very missing courage in our culture. And here's the last thing we find from him, a thing called respect. You saw it in please, you saw it in test, you saw it in whatever. But Daniel has incredible respect that he shows over and over. Let's pick it up in verses 18 to 21. When the training period, that's 3 years, ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. And the king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. They joined the staff of Nebuchadnezzar. And whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, they gave him bogus advice, so it'd screw everything up. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong Bible again. He found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in the land. Daniel remained in the royal service until the 1st year of the reign of King Cyrus, 70 years. I've said it, but now here's a place to write it down. Daniel served a demon-worshiping king so well he kept getting promoted. That's mind-boggling in this day and age. Any of you that are managers, own a company, you're responsible for hiring, firing, promoting, you know full well that you never promote someone that you think looks down on you. You never promote anybody that you think is sabotaging what you're doing. You never promote anybody who's not helpful to you in what you're doing and respectful of you. Reminds me of a second little thing I want you to jot down, and that is we never listen to someone who doesn't like us or treat us with respect. That's how we all respond personally. I'm certainly that way. If I know you don't respect me, or I know you don't like me, or I know I'm kind of your enemy, and you come up and you try to convince me of anything, I'm shut down. There's no way you have any influence because I immediately become defensive. And we need to understand in our life, that's how everybody we work with, everybody in the extended family, we sometimes try to have these little mic drops for God. You ever seen one of those? Like, oh, I told them. They never influence anybody. They influence our friends who go, oh, good job, that was impressive. But they never make the difference. All throughout this thing, he constantly is respectful. That is so foreign. And it's only because he knew in the end we win. Because it didn't seem like it was working in the short run. Back to my Audible illustration. I know in my flesh, if I'm a new intern for Nebuchadnezzar after 3 years, after being castrated, after being having my name changed to worship a demon god, and I'm supposed to get coffee for that boy, I'm like, taking my Keurig, getting it. Here, O King, my pleasure, right? But like I said, Daniel over and over is showing the kind of, in fact, there's a point where Nebuchadnezzar is judged by God. He was so arrogant, he was used by God, and therefore he thought, like, I have God's favor, right? Which is a big difference. And so he's standing out looking over Babylon one day, and he says, is this not the great Babylon I have created by my strength, by my power, for my glory? And God says, you'd be done. And he immediately is struck with mental illness and lives like a wild animal for 1 year in his own castle. Well, God had sent a weird dream to Nebuchadnezzar about this. And no one could figure out what the weird dream was, but guess what? Sure enough, Daniel could. So he tells the dream to Daniel, and Daniel interprets what's gonna happen. Nebuchadnezzar still does it, but he says what's gonna happen. If I'd been Daniel, here's how I tell him. Hey, what's the dream mean? I would have said, Neb, baby, I've been praying for this for a long time. I am so pleased to tell you that due to your arrogance, you're gonna be struck with mental illness and live like a wild animal in your own kingdom. You know what Daniel says? Oh, king, I wish it was anybody but you. He didn't have that fake respect. You know, I for a while worked in retail. Any of you who work in retail know the customer is always what? Right? No, they're not, they're idiots. But I learned to fake it. Daniel's not faking it. It's like, oh, king, no wonder. See, he realized everyone, even God's enemies, are made in the image of God, no matter how much they've marred that image. And God's plan is not to wipe out his enemies, but to win over his enemies. That's what Daniel did. And as a result, like I said, he had these massive, massive changes that were in his heart. Now I want to tie this all together by sharing with you a lesson I learned on a family vacation. We were going to a place called Carlsbad Caverns. Some of you maybe been there. Now, to understand this story, you need to know something about my wife, and that is she's claustrophobic. Now, she's not crazy claustrophobic, but you can see crazy from where she is. And so we were pretty convinced that she'd stay up in the visitor center, I'd take the kids down, we'd do the tour and all that. But when we got there, the visitor center is massive, the elevator is huge, and the cave, when you know the pictures of it, is as big as this room. And so she goes, I think I'll go down with you guys. Wonderful. And then we get down there, she's so relaxed, she says, I think I'll go on the tour with you. I'm going, hallelujah. Family memory, thank you, Jesus. So I'm waiting in line to get the tickets, and two dudes walk out, and one says to the other, that was so cool when they turned the lights out. That's a moral dilemma, isn't it? Do I tell her or not? So of course I didn't tell her. But unfortunately she heard. Honey, they turned the lights out? No, babe, it's just a couple of seconds. Don't worry, it'll be good. Are you sure? Trust me, I'm a pastor. So we go on the tour. Everything's great. At the very end, they set us down on a log to show how dark it is. They unplug the lights. Any of you been there, that last little thing? Can't see your hand move in front of your face. 1001, 1003, 1008, 1011. And then a bat bit me. I felt the sting and I could feel some blood. And then the bat spoke. It said, I will never trust you again. Now I'm in a panic. Like, where do I go from here? What do I do? In my profession, that's a big deal. And then I remembered. My son had the first iteration of those Timex Indiglo watches. You know, where you could push the button and a little light would show you what time it is? So we bought him one. And the light was so lame, the first night he took it home in Oceanside at night, he pushes a button and he comes, Dad, 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 what? I can't see anything. We had to show a flashlight to see it. I mean, we're talking lame. But I'm desperate. So I say, Nathan, push the button on your watch. He does. Suddenly you could see the ground. You could see feet. The bat let go. My marriage was saved. And I learned an incredibly, incredibly important lesson. That tiny light that couldn't tell us what time it was in a bedroom in Oceanside, if the battery lasted long enough, could have led us out of the darkness of that cave. You see, the darker it gets, the brighter the tiniest of lights shines. Your workplace, your response in your family, your response to the community, to national things, all of that has so much more impact than you realize. Because the darker it gets, if we'll push the button, if we'll run his play, the brighter it shines. And that's our job, to shine a light into a darkness, to show the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ, who doesn't want to wipe out, but wants to win over. And that's what Daniel did. That's my encouragement to you. No matter how dark it seems in some micro or macro thing, push the button, run his play, and you will not just survive, you will thrive to the glory of God. Father, would you speak to our hearts individually, not about what someone else needed to hear. Lord, we know your word is not a set of binoculars so we can check out how others live in light of it, but it's a mirror to show us. And would you do that in this next week? Wherever our own personal Babylon is, however tiny to however massive it is, that we would live with a confidence that we know how it all ends. We would have the wisdom to pick our battles and the courage to stand strong when you call us. And the respect and love that you had for us as your enemies when you came and laid down your life, that instead of enemies, we could become your sons and daughters. Father, we just want to do our job for your glory and your fame.